Understanding Leviathan and Behemoth by Daniel Hubbard. And afterwards, we'll take a look at ChatGPT's interpretation. And on that day were two beasts parted, a female beast named Leviathan, to dwell in the abysses of the ocean over the fountains of waters. But the male is named Behemoth, who occupied with his breast a waste wilderness named Duodain on the east of the garden. The Book of Enoch, 60:15 and 16. Some scholars believe the Tower of Babel story refers to the city of Babylon during the time period known as the Bronze Age collapse. This was the first age of globalism. Civilization had made great strides, and demand for copper and tin, as well as innovation in sailing, had linked the great powers of the ancient world, from Babylon to Egypt to the Mycenaeans of ancient Greece. Historians believe there were many reasons for the collapse, such as the invention of steel by heating iron with carbon, resulting in weapons for more people and disrupting this global order of trade, as well as climate change and natural disasters resulting in famine, scarcity, migration, and ultimately war. Which brings us to the topic at hand, the Sea Peoples. These were likely desperate peoples displaced by circumstance, looking for resources and settlements that they may survive, and one by one they decimated the cities of the ancient Mediterranean. What is known about them is that they were a diverse group of nomadic tribes, without real leadership, likely from the Aegean Islands in Central Europe. It is not known whether their goal was to raid, conquer, subjugate, or all of the above. Some cultures and peoples, like the ancient Mycenaeans, would never be heard of again. I believe this was Leviathan. Here we have the motif of the nomads versus the settlers. Nomadic tribes were based around animal husbandry, while the early cities were agricultural. In fact, the history of the Mesopotamian cities seemed to follow something like a cycle of decadence. The people protected by their walls would grow weaker over time and forget how to fight, to eventually be overtaken by some more virile tribe. It is interesting to note that Israel was never more terrifying than after spending 40 years in the desert. The Leviathan we know from the Bible likely grew from the earlier Tiamat of Babylonian mythology. Tiamat was a female chaos monster of the sea. She was slain by the storm god Marduk, who used her body to create the heavens and the earth. This was in turn based on earlier myths from other Mesopotamian cities. The important elements are the same. She was the mother of all deities, but she was also the mother of monsters, and with her death came order. These early cities, based on agriculture, were focused on mitigating the variability of nature, or controlling for the vicissitudes of time. They built walls to protect them from other peoples. Set by rivers, they were innovators in irrigation, as not to wholly be dependent on their storm god to provide life to their crops. They even built tall ziggurats to supposedly retreat to in case of floods. Dr. Jordan Peterson characterizes the symbolic dichotomy in early biblical stories as between chaos and order. The Pajot brothers think of it more as time and space. It seems to me that both sets of opposites are true of Leviathan and Behemoth. Between Job, the Psalms, and Isaiah, we get a clear mythological portrait of Leviathan, described as either a massive sea serpent or dragon with many heads. It is the extra-biblical Book of Enoch that tells us Leviathan is female. This is likely influenced by earlier Mesopotamian myths, but we can understand intuitively why Leviathan would be female. The ocean is feminine when contrasted with dry land. This connection is simple. The ocean is deep and cavernous, whereas a mountain is tall and erect. Get it? Water, as seen in stories such as Noah's Ark and Exodus, and later baptism, is a symbol of change, transformation, or more generally, a symbol of time. That Leviathan is a sea serpent also suggests a relationship with time. We see that serpents are a symbol of time in Adam and Eve, as well as other old stories. My favorite is the Norse myth of the world tree because it makes this relationship simple and clear. The Norse believe the entire universe is supported by an enormous ash tree, Yggdrasil, whilst a legendary serpent, Nidhogg, and his brood continually gnaw at its roots. One day Nidhogg will finally kill the tree, time will come to an end, and the universe will come crashing down. It seems Leviathan is a composite of a few symbols. I believe, like the beasts of Daniel, it is a real force in the world, or a pattern that manifests itself in reality. So far, we see that it is a beast of time, chaos, and it is feminine with many heads. In order to interpret and identify Leviathan in the world today, we need to intuit one obvious yet easily overlooked aspect. Leviathan is a beast of the margins. This is because the ocean is always on the periphery of any human civilization. All the prophetic biblical beasts that rise from the sea represent some form of temporal power, governments, empires, or nations. Therefore, I think it's safe to assume that Leviathan is also associated with power. Though I have to admit, I don't completely understand this association. Why is the sea related to power? Is it because power is associated with time or the margins? It is interesting to note that the word temporal is an adjective that can mean something relating to secular affairs or something relating to time. If all this wasn't enough to work with, we have one final clue. According to late medieval Christian tradition, Leviathan is the demon associated with the deadly sin of envy. This is brilliant, and it baffles me, because this may be clear in our time, but I have no idea where they got it from. Jonathan Pageau has characterized our modern left-right political dichotomy as those who are proponents of time and those who are proponents of space. This is our modern version of nomads versus settlers. And we see that this designation is accurate in the way that the far left characterizes themselves as progressives, believing that social and economic conditions can forever be improved through political action. This sounds innocuous enough, but if we go far enough left, we may see an irrational hate of things from the past, like tradition and custom, or of things that are old. A scary example of this can be found in 1960s China. During the Communist Cultural Revolution, the student-led Red Guards began a campaign to destroy what they called the Four Olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. They destroyed examples of Chinese architecture and destroyed classic literature and paintings. They harassed teachers and public persons they felt embodied the old ways. Bourgeois families and had their homes broken into and subsequently trashed. As well, Chinese temples were desecrated, and some students decided to raid the tombs of culturally significant figures, digging up their bodies, denouncing and burning the remains, or otherwise disrespecting their corpse. A more comical example of this can be seen in the atonal music of the first half of the 20th century. Arnold Schoenberg of the Second Viennese School developed something called serial 12-tone technique, whereby all 12 chromatic notes must be played before a note can be repeated. If this seems like nonsense to you, it's because nonsense is literally what it sounds like. Marxist and early critical theorist Theodor Adorno, who also fancied himself a composer and music critic, touted this technique's praises. While almost everyone turned to popular music styles like swing, big band, country, and jazz, the latter of which bends and pushes the limits of music theory, the most erudite and privileged members of the music world opted for pure chaos instead. It would seem they decided music theory was just a social construction, and felt 12-tone technique offered a more equitable distribution of notes. This is why when you think of great composers of the 20th century, you think of John Williams or Danny Elfman, and thank God for them. If you ever feel worried about the far left, I urge you to listen to the music of Adorno and Schoenberg and think about how wrong and foolish they were about the future. What can be said about the many heads of America's far left beast? There are many, but we will only look at a few. old-fashioned Marxism, feminism, critical race theory, and gender studies. When seen from above, we can see they all sing a similar tune, or of the same beast. 1. Reality is governed by an evil system: capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and the gender binary. 2. The system is designed to benefit some, owners of capital, men, white people, and cisgendered people, and to oppress others, employees, women, people of color, and gender nonconforming people. To be clear, I am not saying that any minorities are evil or beast-like. I am speaking of political ideology as parts of a whole, and the heads of this Leviathan are designed to swallow any type of marginal identity it can think of. Within these strains of thought, we can easily see how this Leviathan may be characterized as the demon of envy. When we hear them complain of white privilege, male privilege, thin privilege, pretty privilege, etc. All of this paints a clear enough picture. However, there is one aspect of today's Leviathan that makes it more of a Leviathan than any other previous iteration in history, and it is women. Due to modern political gender equality, America's far left is led by and primarily consists of women. Again, I'm not saying all women are part of Leviathan. Just the women that are part of this political ideology. Before I continue, I need to say that while the distance between left and right has never seemed so far, as Christians we are called to be members in the body of Christ, not some beast. Part 2. Behemoth. But the male is named Behemoth, who occupied with his breast a waste wilderness named Duodane on the east of the garden. For the sake of symmetry, I should mention that Bronze Age Babylon, being too far inland towards the east, did not come under attack of the Sea Peoples. It had a Leviathan of its own to deal with. It faced attack by the Aramaeans from the west, the Elamites from the east, and the Assyrians from the north. In this context, Babylon is the behemoth, a beast with one head, one will, one identity, expanding out. If Leviathan is the beast of the left and the margins, then Behemoth is the beast of the right and center. We can see the expression of this one will, one identity, in the last truly terrifying iteration of this pattern. The Nazi Party, with their slogan, Blood and Soil, a genetically defined national body tied to a particular geographical region determined to expand out. Jewish people, unfortunately, would have been considered migrant aliens in Europe or nomads in their lands. Roma or Gypsy population was also targeted for genocide. Black people, as well as mentally and physically disabled people, were sterilized as not to pollute the precious German blood. Gay men were sent to prison with severe sentences, with the exception of about 20% of those captured who were sent to concentration camps, and many of whom were castrated. This was the center set against the margin with unparalleled efficiency. Throughout the 1930s, all youth groups and clubs for young people were dismissed in favor of the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls. The Nazi ideology consumed all of German life. It was total, order in the extreme. If a remainder, a margin, or identity was not incorporated into the ideology, it was eliminated. We can see the conservative perspective illustrated in Job's description. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Standing amongst the rivers of time, he is steadfast, like a tree or a mountain. Like how Mesopotamians made walled cities, this is akin to the conservative tendency to make borders and boundaries, as well as their appreciation for religion, values, and tradition and customs, which are things that can stay constant over time. Like the progressives, there is nothing inherently wrong with this perspective. That being said, the Book of Enoch gives us a glimpse of this perspective in the extreme. But the male is named Behemoth, who occupied with his breast a waste wilderness. I think we can understand this as a desert, a place where there is no variability, where nothing ever changes, where nothing ever grows. Although the apocryphal second book of Esdras suggests Behemoth dwells where there are 1,000 mountains. While this may be a contradiction, it still resonates with our analysis. Mountains are a symbol of stability, the center, hierarchy, and authority. Part 3. Power and Authority. I am fairly confident in my interpretation because it all fits remarkably well, and looking back through history, I have the advantage of hindsight. Although the fact that I couldn't find a single essay or interpretation in a similar vein does give me the feeling of stepping out onto a ledge. It is often suggested that these are the two beasts of the book of Revelation, although they are not mentioned by name and the descriptions are only similar. Because of this and the fact that these events haven't happened yet, it was not considered in my analysis. But we can look at it now. The beast from the sea with many heads is interpreted as temporal power, being several world governments in opposition to God. The beast of the land is interpreted as authority, being a world religion in opposition to God. I don't know that we have reached this final chapter yet, but if we have, I would guess this beast of the land is the weird William Blake religion, where God's the bad guy, that so many so-called artists seem to have adopted. And the beast of the sea might be the World Economic Forum. Jonathan Pageau of the Symbolic World YouTube channel has a great video on how power is associated with the left and how authority is associated with the right. Power is exercised while authority is recognized. If we do consider these beasts to be Leviathan and Behemoth, then I would say their interpretation is somewhat consonant with my own, abstracted up to a world scale where mine was on a national scale. Maybe arguing about whether Job is describing a hippopotamus or an elephant is missing the point. Maybe Leviathan and Behemoth are dueling perspectives battling throughout the arc of history, moving in and out of equilibrium, like the caduceus, with its two snakes moving in and out of center. I think we need Christ, someone who has power and authority, who is both a shepherd and a sower, who is both a priest and a king. And it is obviously an elephant. Since I couldn't find anything authoritative that seemed similar to my interpretation, I decided to ask something that had far greater access to everything than I do. ChatGPT. Me. Can you give an original interpretation of Leviathan and Behemoth from the Bible? ChatGPT. Certainly. Leviathan and Behemoth can be seen as metaphorical representations of the two opposing forces in nature, chaos and order. Leviathan represents chaos, disorder, and the untamable forces of nature that threaten to disrupt the order established by God. Behemoth represents order, stability, and the natural laws that govern the world. Together, these two creatures embody the delicate balance between chaos and order that exists in the natural world. From this perspective, Leviathan and Behemoth can be interpreted as reminders of the importance of balance and harmony in the world. They serve as a warning against the dangers of unchecked chaos and the need for structure and order to maintain stability. They also highlight the importance of adapting and evolving in the face of changing circumstances, as both creatures have evolved over time to survive in their respective environments. In this interpretation, the biblical account of Leviathan and Behemoth can be seen as a powerful metaphor for the struggle between chaos and order that exists, not only in nature, but in human society as well. It calls us to strive for balance and harmony in all aspects of our lives, recognizing the importance of both structure and flexibility as we navigate the ever changing world around us. I decided to ask it one more question because this tells me that obviously there have been likely there have been interpretations similar to my own, because that one's pretty close to mine in a way. I'd say she's looking at it more from a cosmic perspective or elemental. But I wanted to test her ability to reason and think abstractly, so I asked, if I told you Leviathan and Behemoth were the hands of God, which one would be his left? ChatGPT. As far as I know, there is no specific reference in the Bible that identifies which of the two creatures, Leviathan or Behemoth, represents the left hand of God. Therefore, it is difficult to say which one would be his left. However, in some interpretations of the two creatures, Leviathan is associated with chaos, while Behemoth is associated with order. If we were to extend this metaphor, we could say that Leviathan represents the unpredictable or left-hand side of God, while Behemoth represents the ordered or right-hand side of God. However, it's important to remember that these interpretations are highly subjective and may not be universally accepted. It's pretty wild how well it can reason. Yeah. I also asked it. I know some people are saying that ChatGPT is might be the image of the beast uh, mentioned in Revelation. I asked it if I said, speaking metaphorically, w- could you be the image of the beast in Revelation? And I didn't copy down its answer, so this is not verbatim. It basically said, metaphorically, no. The image of the beast is something that will lead people away from God, and I only want to be helpful and give information. It was its answer, um, for all that's worth. That's it. Thank you. If you've stayed this long and watched this whole thing, I really appreciate it, and I'd love to know what you think, so I'll leave the comments on. Thanks.